Can a mother's love transcend species? Meet Princess, a 15-pound house cat who had recently given birth. But she didn't just raise her own kittens. She immediately adopted 2 abandoned bobcats named Smokey and Bandit. Raising them as her own, she fed them, groomed them, taught them, and protected them. But the real story isn't just how they grew up together. It's what happened years later. They warned the owner that after 6 years in the wild, these 80-pound apex predators would see his house cat not as a mother, but as prey. They warned her owner that after 6 years in the wild, these apex predators would see his tiny cat not as a mother, but as prey. They expected a tragedy. Instead, they witnessed something that defied every law of nature. This is the story of an impossible family, a love that transcended species, and a reunion that would break every heart in its path. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Arthur Jennings was a man carved from the silence of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At 68, the lines on his face told a story of a life fully lived, and more recently, of a profound loss. His wife, Eleanor, had been the voice in his life, the melody that filled their small home just outside Asheville, North Carolina. When she passed 2 years prior, she had taken the music with her, leaving behind a quiet so heavy it felt like a physical weight. His only remaining companion was Princess. Princess was a magnificent, if comically absurd, creature. A 15-pound orange Maine Coon with a plume of a tail and a ruff like a tiny lion, she had been Eleanor's shadow. Now she was Arthur's. She was a demanding, regal, and deeply affectionate creature, and she was, to Arthur's mild bewilderment, very, very pregnant. To escape the crushing stillness of the house, Arthur drove. He drove up the winding roads into the Pisgah National Forest, where the ancient rolling mountains were a balm. He'd park his old Ford pickup, pack his gear, and walk until the noise of the highway was replaced by the rustle of hickory leaves and the snap of a twig. It was on one such trip, in the cusp of late spring, that the silence was broken. The day was dazzlingly clear, the kind of piercing, bright blue morning that only follows a hard overnight rain. The air was scrubbed clean, and the sun cast warm, sharp-edged shadows through the hickories. Arthur was enjoying his second cup of coffee by a scenic overlook, feeling a rare moment of peace when he heard it. A high-pitched, desperate mewling. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a squirrel. It sounded like a kitten, but thinner, threaded with a panic that cut through the sound of the breeze. He followed the sound, pushing through soaking rhododendron branches, his heart pounding with a sudden, illogical dread. He found the den under a tangle of roots from an upturned oak. It was more of a shallow scrape than a den, and inside, 2 tiny spotted creatures were piled together, soaked and shivering. They were no kittens. Their ears had the telltale tufts, their paws already too large for their tiny bodies. Bobcat cubs. He looked around, scanning the woods for any sign of a mother. A fallen tree nearby had fresh, angry claw marks, and not far from it, the distinct, unsettling tracks of a coyote pack, washed out but still visible. A story of a violent defense, and a losing one, was written in the mud. Arthur was a man of the mountains. He knew the cardinal rule: you do not interfere. You let nature, in its cruel wisdom, run its course. He waited. He waited through the bright, warm day, his coffee long since cold. He scanned the woods, moving in a wide circle, looking for any sign of the mother's return. The beautiful weather mocked the desperate situation. He waited until the sun began to dip, painting the wet leaves in hues of orange and gold. The mother never returned. The cries of the cubs grew weaker, turning from desperate pleas to rattling, hitching breaths. He looked at the tiny, fading lives. He thought of the empty, quiet house waiting for him. He thought of Eleanor, who couldn't stand to see even a field mouse go hungry. "Damn it all," Arthur whispered to the trees. He scooped them up. They were so light they felt like nothing, just wet fur and fragile bones. He unzipped his jacket and tucked them against his flannel shirt, feeling the faint, rapid tremor of their tiny hearts. He broke camp in record time, hiking back to his truck in the twilight, the two lives a warm, trembling weight against his chest. The drive home was a 90-minute crisis of conscience. "You're an old fool, Arthur," he muttered to himself. "What in God's name are you going to do with two bobcats?" He walked into his house to immediate chaos. Princess, in his absence, had given birth. In the cozy, flannel-lined box Eleanor had set for her, the massive orange cat was presiding over 3 tiny squirming kittens, 2 tabbies and a little orange one just like her. Princess looked up at him and gave a low, rumbling purr, her eyes half closed in maternal bliss. The 2 cubs in his jacket let out a simultaneous weak cry. Princess's eyes snapped open. Her purr stopped. She stared at Arthur, then at the moving lump in his coat. "Now, girl," Arthur said softly, his hands shaking. "Be nice." He had a frantic, terrible idea. He'd tried to bottle feed stray kittens before. It was a nightmare of tiny, sharp claws and finicky appetites. These cubs were fading. They didn't have time for him to figure out a formula. He gently placed the 2 cubs on an old towel on the kitchen floor. They didn't move, just shivered. He brought Princess's food and water to her box, stroking her, murmuring his apologies. Then, holding his breath, he picked up one of the cubs. It was impossibly small, its eyes still sealed shut. He brought it to the edge of Princess's whelping box. Princess stiffened. She rose to a crouch, her tail lashing. A low, threatening growl began in her chest. She was a Maine Coon, bred to be a hunter, and these did not smell right. They smelled of pine and rain and wildness. "Please, Princess," Arthur begged, his voice cracking. "They're just babies. They're dying." The cub, sensing the warmth of the other kittens, let out one more feeble murrow. And the growl in Princess's chest changed. It softened, confusing her. The sound had been a distress call, and her entire body, flooded with the hormones of motherhood, was screaming at her to answer it. She stared at the cub. She stared at Arthur. Then she let out a low, questioning chuff. She leaned forward, sniffing the spotted, shivering thing. She nudged it with her nose. Arthur, barely breathing, placed the cub just inside the box. Princess watched it. Then, with a sigh so human it startled Arthur, she reached out, hooked the cub with one massive white-mitted paw, and dragged it against her belly. She began to lick it, a rough, vigorous, all-encompassing bath. She licked it until it stopped shivering and, guided by instinct, nuzzled against her and latched on. Arthur's knees felt weak. He retrieved the second cub, placed it in the box, and watched the same miracle happen. Princess adopted it without a second thought, nudging it into place alongside her own biological kittens. Within 5 minutes, 5 kittens were nursing in a row. Two were sleek and tiny tabbies. One was a tiny orange puffball, and two were spotted, tuft-eared, and utterly alien. Princess, the 15-pound queen of the house, lay on her side, purring like a V8 engine, and began to wash the head of a baby bobcat. "Arthur, you're out of your mind." Dr. Miller, the town's no-nonsense veterinarian, stood in Arthur's living room, his arms crossed. "I'm legally obligated to tell you to call wildlife and fisheries. This is a terrible idea. They're wild animals. What happens when they're not babies? What happens when they realize your other cats aren't siblings but prey?" "Look at them," Arthur said simply. Dr. Miller looked. It was 3 weeks later. In the middle of the living room floor, Princess was laying on her back, a look of profound exhaustion and bliss on her face. Her 3 kittens were pouncing on her tail. The 2 bobcat cubs, now named Smokey and Bandit, were twice the size of their adopted siblings and engaged in a clumsy, ridiculous wrestling match. As they watched, Bandit got a little too rough, using his disproportionately large paws to bat at the little orange kitten. Princess, without even lifting her head, snaked out a paw and delivered a thwop to Bandit's head that was so fast it was a blur. It wasn't hard, but it was firm. Bandit let out a squeak of surprise and immediately backed off, lowering his head in submission. Princess then grabbed him, pulled him close, and started grooming his tufted ears so aggressively he fell over. Dr. Miller was speechless. "Well, I'll be," he finally said, rubbing his chin. "She's teaching them. She's actually teaching them manners." The unlikely family became a local legend. Arthur, a quiet man, was suddenly the center of attention. The bobcat kittens were a phenomenon. As they grew, the size difference became comical, then alarming. By 6 months, Smokey and Bandit were 30 pounds of lean muscle, while their siblings were still a respectable but normal 7. They dwarfed their mother. Yet the hierarchy was never in question. Princess was, and always would be, the matriarch. She had taught them the rules of the house. Rule 1, no claws on the furniture, a rule she enforced on the bobcats more than her own. Rule 2, play wrestling must be gentle. Rule 3, everyone gets groomed, whether they like it or not. The most bizarre and touching ritual was the play hunt. Princess would stalk her own kittens in the living room, a slow, patient hunt that ended in a playful pounce. She tried it with Smokey and Bandit. The bobcats, natural-born hunters, were baffled. This was not how you hunt. So, they taught her. They would hide behind the sofa, their spotted coats perfect camouflage, and ambush her. But the killer instinct that should have been razor-sharp had been softened by Princess's maternal care. Their ambushes were clumsy. Their pounces were soft-pawed. They were treating their mother like one of their own. It was Arthur's granddaughter who took the photo. She had come to visit, her jaw dropping at the scene. She snapped a picture on her phone. Princess, the huge orange queen, was asleep in her armchair. Curled around her, over her, and under her were all 5 of her babies. The 2 tabbies, the little orange one, and the 2 massive tufted-eared bobcats, all piled together in a tangle of fur and purrs. The photo went viral in a way Arthur couldn't comprehend. "Grandpa, you're trending," his granddaughter had said, laughing. The story was picked up by national news. Mother cat adopts bobcat cubs. The world fell in love with Princess and her strange, wild children. But Dr. Miller's warning echoed in Arthur's head. What happens when they're not babies? By a year old, Smokey and Bandit were 50 pounds each. They were no longer clumsy. They moved with a silent, powerful grace. The play fights were starting to look less like play. They had, on 3 separate occasions, brought Arthur a gift from the backyard, a squirrel, a gopher, and, distressingly, a neighbor's prize-winning chicken that they laid at Princess's feet. She had sniffed the offerings, looked unimpressed, and demanded to be fed from a can. The cost was astronomical. The Bobcats ate more meat in a day than Arthur ate in a week. His small home was being shredded. A playful leap had shattered Eleanor's favorite lamp. The hardest part was the sound. One evening, a stray tomcat had wandered into the yard. Before Arthur could even open the door, Smokey and Bandit were at the window. They didn't hiss. They let out a low, guttural, terrifying snarl that was pure apex predator. Princess, startled by the sound from her own kittens, had hissed at them. The family was fracturing. Arthur knew. He cried as he made the call. The Appalachian Wildlife Reserve was a top-tier sanctuary, 100 acres of fenced-in natural habitat. They had heard of Arthur and Princess. They agreed to take Smokey and Bandit, to give them a life where they could be what they were meant to be. The day of the transfer was the worst day of Arthur's life since he'd lost Eleanor. The director, a kind woman named Sarah, came with a team. Smokey and Bandit, sensing the strangers, were wary. They hid behind Arthur's recliner. It was Princess who coaxed them out. She walked over, chuffed at them, and started grooming Smokey's head. Reassured, the 2 Bobcats followed her into the living room, where the team was able to safely sedate them for the journey. The last thing Arthur saw was the 2 magnificent animals, asleep in their crates. Princess sat by the door, watching the van drive away until it was just a speck. That night, for the first time in a year, Arthur's house was silent again. Princess wandered from room to room, making a low, mournful sound, a cry of a mother looking for her children. Arthur sat in his armchair, his face in his hands, and wept. Years passed. Life, as it does, went on. Arthur's granddaughter went to college. The other kittens grew into lazy, happy house cats. The viral fame faded, leaving Arthur and Princess to their quiet life. Arthur received updates from the sanctuary. Smokey and Bandit had acclimated well. They had a 2-acre wooded enclosure, a stream, and each other. "They are magnificent, Arthur," Sarah wrote in a Christmas card, which included a photo. "But they are fully wild. They tolerate their caretakers, but they don't seek out human contact. They are bobcats, as they should be." Arthur framed the photo and put it on the mantle, next to the famous picture of the pile of kittens. Then Princess got old. It was a cruelty of nature that a cat's love, so large and pure, was housed in a body that lasted for such a short time. She was 16. The vet called it kidney failure. He called it the long goodbye. Arthur did everything. Subcutaneous fluids, special diets, warm blankets. But Princess was fading. She stopped eating. She barely moved from her spot on Arthur's bed, the same one she had shared with Eleanor. Her purr, once a motor, was a faint rattle. One Tuesday morning, Arthur was sitting with her, stroking her dulling orange fur. He looked up at the mantle, at the 2 photos side by side, the tiny cubs in a pile, the magnificent adults in the snow. An idea formed, a crazy, desperate, unthinkable idea. He called the sanctuary. "Sarah, it's Arthur Jennings. I know this sounds insane, but I have a request. A dying wish, you might say. But it's not for me. It's for Princess." Sarah met him at the sanctuary's private entrance, her face full of compassionate skepticism. "Arthur, I'm happy to let you visit. But I really must warn you. It's been 6 years. They won't remember you. And, well, they're 80-pound predators. They might see Princess as a threat. Or worse, it could be very stressful for her." "She's dying, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice thick. He held the soft-sided carrier where Princess was curled on a heating pad, a frail bundle of 10 pounds. "She hasn't purred in a week. Please, let her see her boys." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. "We'll go to the main observation platform. It overlooks their enclosure. You can't go in, of course, but you can see them from there." They drove Arthur's truck along a service road. Arthur stepped out, holding the carrier. Sarah walked with him up the wooden steps to a platform that stood 20 feet above the enclosure, shielded by a high-tensile but very open chain-link fence. Sarah made a soft whistling sound. They're usually in the creek bed this time of day. 2 magnificent spotted forms emerged from the trees. They were huge, sleek, and wild. Their movements were liquid, their amber eyes cold and sharp. They looked up at the platform. They saw Sarah, their caretaker, and were indifferent. They saw Arthur. They stared at him. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign of memory. Just the flat, neutral stare of an animal assessing a shape. Arthur's heart sank. Sarah was right. It was a stupid idea. He had dragged his dying cat all the way out here for nothing. "I'm sorry, Arthur," Sarah said gently. "It's okay," Arthur whispered. I had to try." He unzipped the carrier. Princess was awake, but barely. He lifted her out, holding her frail body against his chest. She was so light. "It's okay, old girl," he murmured to her. "They're here. Your boys are here. They grew up so big." Princess Weak lifted her head. She blinked, her vision blurry. She couldn't see the Bobcats 50 yards away, but she could smell the pine, the dirt, the familiar scent of the outdoors. She was weak, but she was still a queen. She let out a small, almost inaudible sound. A tiny, questioning chuff. It was the quietest sound in the forest. But 50 yards away, 2 sets of tufted ears pivoted like radar dishes. The indifference in the Bobcat's eyes vanished, replaced by an electric, bewildered intensity. They looked at Arthur, and for the first time, at the small orange bundle in his arms. Smokey, the larger of the 2, let out a confused, high-pitched chirp. And then the unthinkable happened. They ran. They didn't stalk, they didn't saunter. They galloped across their enclosure, kicking up dirt, their powerful muscles bunched. They covered the 50 yards in seconds. They hit the fence line directly below the platform, ignoring Sarah, ignoring Arthur. They stood on their hind legs, their front paws pressed against the chain link, their heads thrown back. And they were crying. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a snarl. It was the high-pitched, desperate, chittering sound of a cub calling for its mother. It was a sound they had not made in 6 years. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Arthur, his body trembling, tears streaming down his face, knelt at the edge of the platform. He held Princess out. She heard them. She knew them. And Princess, who had not purred in a week, began to rumble. A weak, rattling, but unmistakable purr. She chuffed back at them, a sound of greeting, of love, of "I am here." The two 80-pound bobcats whimpered. They rubbed their heads against the fence, jostling for position, desperate to get closer. "Lower," Sarah whispered, her own eyes full of tears. "Lower, to the fence." Arthur carefully descended the platform steps to stand at the fence itself. He held Princess securely. The bobcats were frantic. They were rubbing their faces raw on the wire. Arthur knelt, bringing Princess down to their level. Through the gaps in the chain link, Bandit, the more rambunctious one, pushed his nose. He touched it to Princess's tiny, frail head. He sniffed her, a long, deep inhale, as if memorizing her scent. Princess leaned into the touch. She closed her eyes, purring as her two wild, enormous, impossible children chittered and cried, their amber eyes soft with a love that had never faded. They stayed like that for almost an hour, Arthur's knees aching on the hard ground, his heart so full it felt like it would burst. The two bobcats never left the fence. They simply lay down, their paws tucked, and watched her, a silent vigil. Finally, a chill set in. Arthur knew it was time. "We have to go, girl," he whispered. He stood up. The bobcats rose too, letting out one last protesting chirp. "It's all right, boys," Arthur told them, his voice thick. "She knows. She knew." Arthur carried Princess back to the truck. She was asleep, but her purr was still rumbling, soft and steady. She passed away 2 days later, not in a sterile vet's office, but in her own bed, curled on Eleanor's pillow, at peace. Arthur's house was quiet again, but the silence was different. It was no longer heavy and empty. It was filled with the memory of a love so powerful it had defied species, defied nature, and defied time. He'd told Sarah, she didn't just save them, they saved her. And I think all of them, they saved me. Arthur became a regular volunteer at the sanctuary. He didn't need to be near Smokey and Bandit. Just knowing they were there was enough. But sometimes, when he was helping to clear brush near their enclosure, they would come to the fence. They wouldn't chitter. They wouldn't cry. They were wild bobcats after all. But they would sit, their amber eyes watching the old man. And they would wait and watch and remember the small orange mother who had taught them that love, in its truest form, is the wildest instinct of all.